So today marks Juneteenth, a day commemorating the moment in 1865 when enslaved African Americans in Galveston, Texas, finally learned they were free. More than 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, Juneteenth was officially recognized as a federal holiday in 2021. Reverend, your thoughts this morning?
Well, I think that as we are going to celebrate this holiday, we should also take a real measure of where we are. The fact of the matter is that those in Texas who were enslaved knew nothing about the Emancipation Proclamation, knew nothing about freedom, and those that were freed on that day of January 1st, 1863, that Lincoln signed, were in the Confederate States, not the free states. Those slaves in the free states weren't freed until the 13th Amendment. Even then, people in Texas weren't freed until General Granger came in this date in 1865 and let them know they were free. So all of this is American history, and certainly history for African Americans, at a time that history is being challenged to be taught in certain schools under this administration, and some states are trying to eliminate this. And I don't think that it is healthy, not only for those of us that are the ones that have ancestors that were enslaved. It's not healthy for the country to show the progress this country made in fighting slavery, of instituting the Emancipation Proclamation. It should be a way of us saying that we should continue to grow together rather than to try to eliminate the story from being told.
Okay, y'all, it's kind of my attention that folk really don't know what Juneteenth is. Yeah, now I let y'all chill on St. Patrick's Day because y'all really didn't know why y'all was drinking. I let y'all chill on Cinco de Mayo because y'all really didn't know y'all was drinking, but not on Juneteenth, baby. Let's get into it. So boom, slavery was technically over in 1863. Lincoln was like, okay, y'all free, right? But in Texas, in Tejas, they was like, shh, don't tell him yet. Don't tell him down here. We want to get some more of that free labor. So the slaves were still out there picking cotton, struggling, sweating all of that for 2 more years, y'all. On June 19, 1865, Union soldiers pulled up like, y'all know y'all free, right? Y'all know y'all been free, right? And our ancestors out there like, what you said? Oh, snap. So Juneteenth, June 19th, is the real Independence Day for us, okay? It's giving liberation, joy, and you tried it vibes, all in one. It's our barbecues with our cousin on the grill and them Jesus sandals, with our red Solo cups, with our playlist that got Frankie Beverly and Megan Thee Stallion on it. So now that you know what Juneteenth is for real, how are you gonna celebrate this year?
Why is Juneteenth a problem? Not because, again, it's so subversive. On its face value, I have no problem with it. I think it's wonderful to say, okay, liberation of slaves, all that good stuff. No. The issue is that the entire point of it, as per postmodernists do and deconstructionists, is to subvert July 4th. That has always been the agenda. That there's a Black Independence Day and a National Independence Day, the same way that they have a black national anthem that plays before NFL games, that they have black-only dormitories and black-only math classes. It is a neo-segregationist federal holiday, is what it is. They're so tricky, aren't they? Because they say, oh, Charlie, you against the emancipation of slaves? Of course we're not against that, because that's not what this is about. This is a summertime competitor to create multiple Independence Days to further deteriorate, erode, and destroy the celebration of our actual Independence Day.
Today is Juneteenth, and if nobody ever told you why this is a big deal, let me help you out. You probably already know how slavery in America lasted for over 250 years. Well, eventually the government signed something called the Emancipation Proclamation, which freed all enslaved people nationwide. But there was a big problem, because you just couldn't send out an email to all the slave owners. Back then, it took a long time for news to travel across the country. So in certain places, it took years for the news of freedom to reach the enslaved people. It took the longest for people in Galveston, Texas. They were enslaved an extra 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation freed everyone. So when Union soldiers finally got to them on June 19, 1865, they celebrated. And we have been celebrating that same day for over 160 years. So happy Juneteenth, y'all.
What the hell is Juneteenth? And why do we even bother celebrating it? And to my fellow white people, this one's for you. Now I'm going to drop some knowledge on you really fast, so please try to keep up. Juneteenth was made into a federal holiday by President Biden back in 2021. Now, Juneteenth, or June 19th, is when we now recognize the official end of slavery in the states here in America. It ended in Texas on June 19th, 1865, which about 250,000 enslaved Americans gained their freedom. Now, to be factually correct, Oklahoma still had enslaved Americans, but they were only a territory. And please, please listen to me as I tell you this, because I'm going to point out two very uncomfortable truths here in America. Number one, there was a little over 12 million Africans who were enslaved and shipped over to the New World, and only about 10.5 million of them made it, meaning roughly 1.5 million enslaved Africans lost their lives just on transporting the transport over here to America. And at the time of emancipation, there were almost 4 million enslaved Americans who were given their freedom. So 10.5 million enslaved Americans, 4 million granted their freedom. So that means 6.5 million enslaved men and women were worked to death without compensation, plus the 1.5 million that were lost while being transported over here. Those souls are gone forever. That gives us a total of about 8 million human lives. But do you know how many soldiers, American soldiers, we've lost in all our wars, both combat and non-combat casualties? About 1.5 million. That's over 5 times as many people that lost their lives than we've lost soldiers. This is a serious holiday. And to further prove my point, speaking of holidays, Christmas is the most popular holiday here in America. And we all know Santa Claus, the guy that I look like, reigns supreme. But did you know Santa Claus was created as a marketing campaign by Coca-Cola Bottling Company, Coke, 125 years ago? Have you ever wondered why Santa's red and white, Coke is red and white, why Santa and Coca-Cola dominate Christmas? We care more about Christmas than trying to fix and repair our past where we enslaved innocent people and just celebrating them getting their freedom. I think that's kind of messed up, and I'll be proud to celebrate Juneteenth tomorrow in Cincinnati at the FC Cincinnati Major League Soccer game. We're having HBCU night, and I'm going to soak in the moment and the importance of what this night means. I'll see you on the road.
Juneteenth is for and about Black Americans. It's not about the diaspora. It's not about Haitians. It's not about Jamaicans. It's not about people in the Caribbean. It is not about people who are not from America. It's been very interesting over the past couple of years to see the diaspora and all of the tethers and all of the people who are Black but not from America at all try to claim Juneteenth as a part of their own. There are even some Juneteenth celebrations that are saying, oh, this is a celebration of the diaspora, and we're going to talk about Africa, and we're going to talk about Nigeria and Jamaica and wherever. And I'm here to say that no, this is about Black Americans. If you celebrate Juneteenth, I personally think that it's been overtaken by leftism, but that's neither here nor there. If you celebrate Juneteenth and you are an African American, you are a Black American, this holiday is for you. This holiday is not for you to share with the entire diaspora. This is not something else for them to colonize and cut you out of, because they like doing that a lot. I think that some African is even the CEO of Essence, which is wild. But this is about Black Americans. So Black Americans, if you celebrate Juneteenth, let it be about you, Black Americans, and not the entire diaspora.
They have Black History Month. They have HBCUs. They have Black award shows. Why do they need Juneteenth too? Oh, and my favorite one, we already have Independence Day. You do know that July 4th, 1776 was not freedom for everybody, right? Black people were still slaves. So no, everyone wasn't free. Everyone wasn't included. Everyone didn't get liberty and justice. So when people ask why do they need their own holiday, maybe ask why they weren't included in the first one. Let's continue to be honest. Most things, all things in this country were built for white people by default. So when Black people now get a channel, an organization, a school, or a holiday, it's not special treatment, it's inclusion. It's making space in a country that intentionally left them out for a long time. Black history is U.S. history. So since you don't know, let me tell you what Juneteenth actually is. On January 1st, 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. But there's way more to it than that little animated video that you watched in school. So do you really think that slavery ended that day and everybody was just free to walk outside? The South said, oh my God, guys, I am so sorry. Let me get you guys set up with some houses, some land, a fresh start. No, that's not what happened. Freedom had to be enforced. So they still kept everyone as slaves, didn't tell them they were free, didn't tell them anything. On June 19th, 1865, Union troops finally arrived in Galveston, Texas to announce to the enslaved people they were free. That was more than 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And Texas matters because where they did not have the same Union military presence during the war, they did not have to enforce freedom. Actually, enslavers were moving there because they thought that they could extend slavery longer. They had to work the land that was owned by someone else while giving up half of their crop. On top of that, they still had to purchase their seed, their food, their tools, their supplies, most of the time on credit. So at the end of the day, when it was all said and done, they ended up still owing money. So no, Juneteenth is not just some made-up holiday because we have to give black people special treatment. It's been celebrated for generations. The difference is it was only made a federal holiday in 2021, which is absolutely heartbreaking, just like this whole fucking history. The whitewashed version is always, we abolished slavery, we're so great, we freed you, yay, let's move on. Everybody loves to leave out what happened after slavery. A lot of slaves were free on paper, but they didn't have anything. They didn't have any land. They didn't have any money. They didn't have a fucking house. They didn't have any way to start. On top of that, they have been separated from their families, their children sold, separated from their wives and husbands. So they couldn't just go build a new life. They were trying to piece together the one that was stolen from them. The Freedmen's Bureau was created to help formerly enslaved people with food, clothing, labor contracts, finding their lost family, as well as marriage licenses and many other things. But freedom without resources is still a trap. That leads us to sharecropping. A lot of freed people wanted land because land meant independence. That's where 40 acres and a mule came from. But like everything else in this situation, it didn't quite happen like that. A lot of that land that could have actually helped people rebuild their lives was given back to former Confederate owners. Yeah, slavery ended on paper, but majority of people were still pushed right back into it with no fucking choice, no way to survive. Our country has a pattern of that, acting like we are so great to abolish things and change them for the good while actually just rebranding them into something else. So Juneteenth is not about replacing the 4th of July. It's not about giving black people more stuff. It's about telling the truth. And if the truth bothers you more than the history itself, maybe you should ask yourself why.
Boy, there's a lot of white people upset about this Juneteenth holiday. Woo-wee. I even heard my little Trump town, this old mediocre white man ask, why can't we have a white holiday? And I asked him, I said, so do you think that the Declaration of Independence included black people? No, they were considered property. And us white ladies, all you white ladies out there, that declaration, it didn't include you either. You didn't have any rights. Something I've always said is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Terms and conditions apply. That's been a white holiday forever. Juneteenth is for black people. And for my black friends and family, happy Juneteenth. Now, as a white lady, I'm going to go up here to Amazon, and it's got a whole section that says Black Stories. And I'm going to pick one, and I'm going to watch it and try and learn something. And maybe if you do the same, you wouldn't be so bent out of shape about it. I love y'all. Happy Juneteenth.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Freedom Room, the channel where we explore history, politics, and today's biggest issues with facts, context, and balanced commentary. If you are new here, please don't forget to like, to subscribe, and to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss out our videos. Today we'll be talking about Juneteenth, a holiday that many Americans celebrate every year, but whose history is often misunderstood. Why is Juneteenth so important? Why is it celebrated on June 19 instead of the day slavery officially began to end? And why does it still spark debates today? Before we dive into the discussion, let's watch a few clips showing Juneteenth celebration, historical moments, and different opinions surrounding the holidays. Watch closely and we'll come back to share our thoughts later.
So apparently Juneteenth is unchristian, okay? Because I know somebody close to me, they were working their job and somebody came in and said, I almost had to stop coming here because I saw that you guys aren't gonna be open for Juneteenth, right? So the person in my life said, oh, okay, why? And this person said, because I'm a Christian. because I am a Christian, I am mad that you guys are, I don't know, recognizing this day as significant and important. So let's try to figure out what her problem with it is, because if you are not aware, this is what it is. It is celebrated on June 19th to commemorate the end of slavery in the United States. And this woman is saying, I might actually have to boycott this business because I am a Christian. I'm a Christian, so I'm against the end of slavery. So yeah, that was absolutely insane. And I had no idea that there was a sector of Christians who are so against the end of slavery. Okay, actually, maybe I did know that, but it was still shocking to hear somebody be so blatant about it.
Okay, so Juneteenth has only been a federal holiday for less than 5 years, so I really don't blame you if you don't understand what it is or what we're celebrating exactly. So I figured I'd make this video to clear it up for people that don't. So Juneteenth has been a holiday in the state of Texas since the early 90s, and what it celebrates is Black people's liberation from slavery, right? In 1865, when the Emancipation Proclamation was declared, that said that any slave in a Confederate state is now officially free under U.S. law, that basically changed the tide of the Civil War, right? Because now Black people had a reason to fight for their own freedom, and through Black people fighting in the Union Army, they won it, obviously. Juneteenth refers to June 19th, right after the Emancipation Proclamation, where people rode into Galveston, Texas to inform the slaves that they were free. So Juneteenth is kind of like an Independence Day within the United States that's completely irrespective to the July 4th Independence Day that we all know about. And yeah, like the holiday is still very young, so the traditions are still kind of being created. Like I know some people will drink lemonade, some people have like red velvet cake, I guess. But it's cool because it's brand new, right? So you can create your own Juneteenth celebration, and I feel like that's fine as long as we're glorifying the freedom of Black people, specifically in this country. There's really not a wrong way to do it.
Okay, everybody, a lot of people are going to be saying happy Juneteenth. It should not be a federal holiday, and I'm on my way to work.
No, you're not. You dead. Anyways, happy Juneteenth, especially to my people.
So I saw a weird post today that basically was like making fun of Black people for celebrating Juneteenth. And it said like, oh, like, ha ha ha, like Juneteenth isn't for Black people, it's for Black Texans. And I feel like that completely misses the history of how Juneteenth became a national holiday in the first place. And before I get into like what Juneteenth is and the history of it, I want to say as a white American, I want to be careful that I don't like speak over anybody, but I do feel like it's important for white people to also know this history because it's not just Black history, it's American history. This is an important part of our shared history that all of us should definitely understand. So Juneteenth exists because about 250,000 people were still enslaved in Texas. This is about 2.5 years after they were supposed to be freed. So 1863, Abe Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation declaring enslaved people in Confederate states free. But a proclamation on paper and freedom in practice were two very different things because Texas was pretty far from most of the major battlefields of the Civil War. So slaveholders had moved enslaved people into Texas during the war, like away from everything. And there weren't enough Union troops to enforce emancipation. So slavery continued heavily in Texas. So on June 19th, 1865, this is where Juneteenth comes from. The Union Major General Gordon Granger arrives in Galveston, Texas, and publicly reads General Order Number 3. And it says, the people of Texas are informed that in ordinance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. So that day becomes known as Juneteenth. The following year, 1866, Black Texans held the first Juneteenth celebration. So they gathered to pray, to read the proclamation out loud. They were singing freedom songs, sharing meals, and celebrating the freedom that had been delayed for them for years. Because segregation had also already taken hold and many public parks excluded Black Americans. They basically also had nowhere to celebrate. So then by 1872, Black leaders in Houston raised $1,000 to purchase 10 acres of land that became Emancipation Park, which was one of the first parks in Texas purchased specifically for Juneteenth celebrations. So now here is where that post falls apart. Juneteenth did start in Texas, But it didn't stay in Texas, because between like 1910 to like about 1970, Great Migration takes place. Okay. Millions of Black Americans leave the South. They're looking for jobs, looking for somewhere safer to be, better opportunities, trying to escape like Jim Crow laws, racial violence, voter suppression, economic exploitation. So a lot of Black Texans moved to like Chicago, Detroit, Oakland, Los Angeles, like Seattle, Denver, Pittsburgh, New York City, Washington, D.C. They brought Juneteenth with them, is my point. The holiday spread across the country because the people who celebrated it spread across the country. So families carried the tradition with them, churches carried the tradition with them, entire communities carried the tradition with them. So while Juneteenth began as Texas's celebration, it became a national Black American tradition through migration and community. Another interesting thing I saw is that there was a white person that had posted a comment that was like, well, why isn't Juneteenth just like during Black History Month? And that's when I really realized like people don't know what Juneteenth is. And it's a very common misconception amongst white Americans. And it's because Juneteenth survived for over 100 years before the government officially recognized it. I think 1980 is when Texas officially recognized Juneteenth as a state holiday, which is still more than 100 years after Black Americans had already been celebrating it. And then in 2021, 156 years after it began, Juneteenth finally becomes a federal holiday. And while we're talking about history getting lost, let's talk about the flag. So a lot of companies use like the red, black, and green for Juneteenth because those are the Pan-African colors. But the official Juneteenth flag is actually red, white, and blue. The star in the center represents Texas, where Juneteenth began. The burst around it symbolizes a new beginning. And then the curved horizon represents a promise of freedom, expanding into the future. The colors were chosen deliberately to make a point. Black Americans' fight for freedom is inseparable from American history. It is American history. So to respond to that original post that I saw, no, Juneteenth is not just for Black Texans. It started with Black Texans, but because of the Great Migration and the generations of Black Americans that kept the tradition alive, it became a part of Black American history, period. Juneteenth is the story of freedom that was delayed, and freedom that was having to be enforced, and a community that essentially refused to let that history be forgotten. And I think that's awesome. So happy Juneteenth. Love you guys.
I'm about to ruin Juneteenth for some of y'all, but it needs to be said. Juneteenth only exists because Democrats did not want to give up their slaves. And even now in the present day, they still do not want to give them up. And let me tell you why. Juneteenth actually exists because Union General Gordon Granger had to go down to the beaches of Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1865 to tell the slaves there that they were free. Now, those of you who understand history realize Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation 2.5 years before on January 1st, 1863. So what happened in that 2.5 year period? Basically, the Southern Democrat slave owners kept their own slaves in the dark because they did not want to give those slaves up and remove those literal chains. So Gordon Granger had to go all the way down there and tell the slaves they were free, and if he had not, then many Democrats would have kept those chains on those slaves forever. People are going to hear that information and feel some kind of way. I don't really care about that. What I care about is the fact that, yes, Joe Biden made this a national holiday because it was originally only a state holiday here in Texas until very recently. But he did this intentionally because the Democratic Party wants to rewrite history, and they're doing everything in their power to do that and to distance themselves from their own negative history. People will now say, oh, well, the party switched. And the reason they say that is because they do not want you to realize that the very same reason that those Southern Democrat slave owners did not want to tell the slaves they were free is the same reason they will not tell people today that they are free and can actually make their own choices, which is why they keep individuals in the Black community shackled to the Democrat Party, shackled to the inner cities that don't serve them, and shackled to policies that ultimately do not serve their best interests. So the fact of the matter is, someone can sit there and complain and say, oh, the party switched, oh, you're rewriting history. No, I'm telling you the actual facts. You can look them up for yourselves, but you are the one who has to make the decision to take those chains off, and if you don't, then that's ultimately on you. So if you did not know this information, now you do. And even if you did know it, share it with somebody else, because I guarantee you not enough people understand the real history behind Juneteenth. It needs to be spread far and wide.
Believe it or not, there are 2 states that didn't end slavery until 6 months after Juneteenth. Yeah, because you see, though the Emancipation Proclamation in theory freed all the enslaved people in the Confederacy, and Juneteenth marks the day that all enslaved Black Americans in the former Confederacy were finally freed, people were still enslaved mainly in Kentucky and Delaware. You see, they were part of a group of border states that didn't technically fully join either side during the Civil War, and weren't covered by the proclamation. So yeah, the enslaved Black people in Kentucky and Delaware weren't freed until the 13th Amendment went into effect in December of 1860. 1765. The kicker, though, is that neither state voted to enact the 13th Amendment at the time, which didn't matter since the required 27 other states did. In fact, Delaware didn't ratify the 13th Amendment until 1901, and Kentucky didn't until 1976. But at least both of them can say they weren't the last to do so. In 1995. Which state do you think it was?
We've been lied to about Juneteenth. What does it mean to tell me I'm free, but I have to remain quiet about it and return back to the plantation? That's the literal words of General Granger. I'm about to read them to you. The freed men are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They're informed that they would not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they would not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. See, the newly defeated Confederate soldiers and the plantation owners, aka masters, was worried about, man, they finna come down here and mess up our way of life. You know, I know we lost. I know we was some treasonous traitors, but y'all gotta look out for us. And what you think General Granger did? This Emancipation Proclamation on June 19th reinforced the priority of keeping the formerly enslaved population at work on their respective plantations. In addition to stated worries about lawlessness and private discussions about the loss of political power, the primary concern for Galveston authorities appeared to revolve around the impact that emancipation would have on the cotton production. I'm born and raised in Texas, grew up celebrating Juneteenth my whole life. But when I read these historical excerpts, man, on June 19th, we're told to remain quiet about our freedom and return back to the plantation post we've been working at. That wasn't enough, though. The day after Juneteenth, because by that time the word got around to the plantation owners, to the enslavers, to the old sore-losing Confederates. So then General Granger issued another message. All persons formerly slaves are earnestly enjoined to remain with their former masters under such contracts as may be made for the present time. Their own interests as well as that of their former masters and other parties requiring their services renders such a course necessary and of vital importance until permanent arrangements are made under the Freedmen's Bureau. It gets worse than that, though. I would argue we're taught a sanitized version of Juneteenth that absolves Union soldiers for really being some suckers in line for the Confederates to not only get off easy, but for them themselves, making a little compromise and be like, we ain't gonna destroy your whole way of living. Sure, crop 'em. It's the reminder. This is the day after Juneteenth, what General Granger is saying. No persons formerly slaves will be permitted to travel on the public thoroughfares without passes or permits from their employers, or congregate in buildings or camps at or adjacent to any military post or town. I'm not lying or capping. And then this is what was printed in the Galveston Daily News right after Juneteenth. We are glad to learn that General Granger and our Provost Marshal General are both practical men and not theorists. They look upon emancipation not as freeing the Negro from all obligation to labor, for no human being, white or black, enjoys such freedom, but simply as changing obligation to work without stipulated wages, to an obligation to work, one more time, to an obligation to work for such reasonable wages as they may be mutually agreed upon. It get worse than that, though. So on June 19th is when he get into Galveston. On June 22nd, he gets into Houston. And what does he tell them? The freedmen in and around the city of Houston are hereby directed to remain for the time being with their former owners. They are assured that, and by so doing, that they forfeit none of their rights of freedom. And the agent of the government whose business is that to superintend the making of contracts between freedmen and those who desire to employ them is expected to be here soon. In the meantime, the freedmen are advised to be patient and industrious. I ain't gonna bore you out with too much of this. I'm turning into a YouTube video, but what I say in closing, General Granger said no encouragement or protection will be given to those who abandon their present homes for the purpose of idleness. Notice how the word idle, or us doing nothing because, hey, shit, we ain't working for free, so we must be doing nothing. How that word is something that's always been prescribed on us to justify criminalizing us or erasing us. Education is elevation, and the history of Juneteenth is some dark shit.
Come back. After watching those clips, what stood out in your mind the most? Did you notice that while many people celebrated Juneteenth as a day of freedom and hope, others still question its meaning or why it has become a national holiday? To understand Juneteenth, we have to go back to the American Civil War. On January 1st, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation declaring the enslaved people in the Confederate States were free. However, not everyone was immediately liberated because many Confederate areas were still outside Union control. It wasn't until June 19, 1865, when Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, that thousands of enslaved people finally learned they were free. Imagine waiting more than 2 years after a proclamation of freedom before hearing that your life has changed forever. That day became known as Juneteenth, combining the word June and 19th. For generations, Black communities celebrated Juneteenth with family gatherings, church services, music, storytelling, and community events. In 2021, it officially became a federal holiday in the United States. Today, however, Juneteenth is about more than remembering history. Some people see it as an important opportunity to honor those who endured slavery and to reflect on Americans' journey towards equality. Others argue that America already had Independence Day and worry that Juneteenth has become too political. Those are conversations that continue across the country. History often reminds us that laws alone do not instantly change people's lives. Sometimes justice can be delayed, and 19th June is one example of that reality. Understanding this history does not require everyone to agree on every political issue, but it does encourage us to learn from the past and think about how freedom and equality are put into practice. What's your thoughts about this? Should Juneteenth be celebrated by all Americans? Does learning about this history bring people together, or does it create more division? I would like to hear your perspective, so share the thoughts respectfully in the comments below. If you are enjoying this discussion, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the Freedom Room.
Well, today is the 5th year the U.S. federal government is observing the holiday of Juneteenth. It commemorates the day the last enslaved people in the Confederacy were informed of their freedom. Millions of Americans have celebrated Juneteenth at the state and local levels for years. The Emancipation Proclamation, which declared all people enslaved in Confederate-held territories were free, took effect on January 1st, 1863. But many slaveholders across the Confederacy refused to follow this order. Specifically in Galveston, Texas, it wasn't until the Union Army arrived 2.5 years later, after the Civil War ended, that the Emancipation Proclamation was actually enforced. On June 19, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger issued what was called General Orders No. 3 when he arrived in Galveston. It said in part, the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. The holiday's name of Juneteenth comes from a combination of June and 19th. Now, initially, Black Americans celebrated different emancipation days depending on the state they lived in, some of which are still celebrated today. For example, Mississippi's was on May 8th to mark the date when Union troops arrived there, while Maryland's was on November 1st to mark when the state passed a new constitution outlawing slavery in 1864. While Juneteenth continued to be observed in Texas and celebrated during the early 1900s across the South, it fell out of national attention for decades until the Civil Rights Movement. The year Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, 1968, his supporters celebrated Solidarity Day on June 19th, about 100 years after Major General Granger's speech. Activists gathered in Washington, D.C. to celebrate the progress of the Civil Rights Movement and demand legislation benefiting America's poor. About a decade later, in 1979, Texas became the first state to make Juneteenth an official holiday. Currently, 30 states recognize Juneteenth as a permanent state holiday, according to the Congressional Research Center.
Black people want to be left alone. They don't want revenge. They don't want to replace us, as some extremist groups have said. They just want to live life in peace, the way they want to live. They want family, they want love, and they want to live in a society where they know they belong here. They want society to also know that they belong here. They want to walk out their door and not worry that they're going to be treated unfairly, or they're going to get that look like they're not welcome, or that someone's going to try to touch their hair like a zoo animal. Yes, they want they want white people to fix white problems of prejudice and ignorance and all the ways that a wrongful sense of superiority is baked into our society. Yes, they want that to change. Yes, they want acknowledgement for harms done. They don't want us to just explain things away or justify or gloss over things without really listening. But more than anything, they want to be themselves, fully express who they are, love who they are, be with their family, and live in peace. That's it.
Look, I know Juneteenth is a new federal holiday, but some of you are already losing the plot, and that is not going to work. There are whole states whose teachers have their arms tied behind their back because they cannot teach the whole lead-up history to what even caused Juneteenth in the first place. Because there's already collective confusion about enslavement and American law and how that all ties together and how it affects today, we have to be really precise about why we celebrate what we celebrate. We have to remember that all states, not just America, states as nations, as government entities, they all tend over time to tell the story about themselves as the memory of the state and not the memory of the people. And that distinction, as we've talked about a million times, is really important because states don't remember individuals or groups or communities and how those people paid for what the state created or has. But when you teach the history of a people, you are remembering the agency, the imagination, and the power that those individuals fought for themselves to carve out a life for themselves or to have a future. What's already happening is people are framing Juneteenth as a celebration of when Black people, enslaved people, were given the news about their freedom, or they were given their freedom. I know not everyone's a history nerd, but we cannot be out here confusing the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st with Juneteenth, which happened 2.5 years about later in June. I'm harping on this because people have taught or tend to see the Civil War as it ended and the traitors, the Confederacy, they agreed and went along with Reconstruction, with giving people back their rights. And that's why anytime you see Black people not ahead or suffering, it's their fault. Because look, we did the process, we did the war, we gave them all the rights, and now it's totally on you. That hides the way white supremacy and white supremacist economies and systems and social structures and traditions decided to hold on to power for as long as possible. That's why 2.5 years later, we've got General Granger reading the Emancipation Proclamation in Galveston. Juneteenth is less about the general being like, hey guys, you're free. And it's more him saying to Texas, to anybody who wants to keep holding on to their slaves and lying to them and pretending that they're not free, that you now have to follow the law and we're going to enforce it. Those 9 about Black regiments marching down into Texas, they weren't there to just spread, tidings of good news and joy. They were there to tell white supremacists, stand down. Juneteenth is not just about one side and another side finding out what the new laws are and saying, hey, let's start enforcing this. This is about the United States government having to say, you guys are lawless human traffickers and you're insurrectionists and you need to cut it out. Christopher Wilson, who works at the Smithsonian's Museum of Natural History, he makes a point that this is not about news traveling slowly through Texas to the poor enslaved people. It's about power traveling slowly, the power to be free and the power to self-determine your own life. The news had been out. The news was still coming. People knew what was going on to some degree. Some people didn't know, but the news was out there. There was nothing stopping people technically from knowing the fact that they were free. But the power, the seizing of that power, the seizing of that freedom, that's what Juneteenth is about. This was news about how still enslaved people who'd been fed lies about the fact that the war was over or not over, and the fact that they were still in chains, they're still being forced to work the land and still being tortured or whatever, being told not only are you free, but now the power is coming into the state to enforce that freedom. But let's make another distinction here, because that kind of sounded like the federal government was going to come in and do all the work and make sure everyone is free. No, they were offering the enslaved people a chance. If they could get themselves out of rebellious slaveholding areas, that they would have a shot at being free and that they wouldn't be prosecuted for running away. We can never make this about white supremacy saying, okay, you win, or falling down and giving up, or the American people saying, let's pack up the tools of white supremacy because we lost the war, so now we can't do anything about it anymore. This whole following period of time was largely about Black people having to say, what's our plan to get free? What's our plan to take back as much power as possible? And how do we make sure that the rebels that are still around us that will do anything in their power to keep us here, how are we going to get out of this situation? And as Mr. Wilson points out, this is a legacy that has continued today. When Brown v. Board happened, it wasn't the courts that ultimately ended up enforcing the desegregation. It was black people putting their bodies on the line. Morgan v. Virginia in 1946, he brings this up too. They desegregated the buses, but it wasn't until people, white people and black people, put themselves on those buses and protested that it actually desegregated. And yes, of course, the black troops marching in to spread the word of freedom, that's important, that's powerful. There are people who they truly didn't know. But so much of what followed afterwards were black people saying, all right, let's do something now with this freedom. They had to make it a social reality for themselves, because just because it was a legal reality didn't mean that the country and the culture was ready to back them. There is a reason people do not want to teach the story about what led up to Juneteenth, but will be like, oh yay, we'll put up some Juneteenth stuff, and it's about when black people found out they were free. Juneteenth connects people today to a legacy of people looking around and realizing they're going to seize the power that the federal government or other people are not going to give to them. It's about realizing the full strength and the deep roots of racism and how it still wasn't strong enough against black people's collective action. That's not really like a sweet watermelon cocktail holiday, is it? It's kind of scary. And no, people are not just now starting to celebrate Juneteenth because black people have to be in everything and black people are everywhere. It's one of those things that people were celebrating for a while in their hometowns, but they never talked openly about it because guess what? Lynchings were a thing, and people would come and attack black people who were celebrating the freedom that their government told them was in their right to have. Don't let anyone water it down for you. Happy Juneteenth.
On June 19th, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger finally arrived in Texas to issue General Order Number 3, which released the enslaved people of Texas. This was 2.5 years after Lincoln had signed the Emancipation Proclamation. I think it's super disappointing that it took until 2021 under Biden to have a federal holiday for this, as these steps towards we the people and treating human beings, all human beings, like equals, should be celebrated at every turn, because we've come from a really dark past and a lot of people want to go back to that dark past, but we continue to move forward in small but progressive ways. And I think today is a big day. I think it is a huge day. I think it's absolutely something everybody should celebrate. It's disappointing as well in the fact that there are still people who push against it. You know, you have, I think Trump ran on making Juneteenth a holiday in 2020 when he was running for re-election, and then promptly abandoned that and started to criticize non-working holidays on Juneteenth. I think that's sad. And there is a group of people who do not celebrate the freedom of other human beings, and we're still dealing with that. But I think slowly we are moving forward. And I say that from the space of a white entitled man. So my words kind of mean shit. And the words of people who have been enslaved because of their color, because of where they're from, mean a hell of a lot more than mine do. But I think this is something that is long overdue and being celebrated. And it's something we all should celebrate just as members of the human race. So happy Juneteenth. Thanks.
Back, Juneteenth reminds us that freedom is not just about what's written on papers. It's also about whether those words became reality in people's lives. The story teaches us that justice can be delayed, but history should never be forgotten. One lesson we can all take from Juneteenth is the importance of learning from history instead of ignoring it. By understanding both the achievements and the struggles of the past, we have more informed conversations about the future. Now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe Juneteenth should be celebrated as a national holiday by all Americans, and what lessons should future generations take from this history? Leave your honest opinion in the comment section. Let's keep the discussion respectful and thoughtful. If you found this video informative, please give a thumb up, subscribe to the Freedom Room, share the video with others, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out our upcoming decisions. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.